Hey guys, so this insanely hot UK heatwave continues, which is why over the last week or so, I've not did any live streams, I've not did any video recordings because this room is, well, it's an absolute sweatbox. But I wanted to brave this sweatbox because today I want to talk about this graphics card. This is the Gigabyte RTX 3090 Aorus Master, and I picked this up in January 2021, and it's been my main graphics card in my PC for 6 or 7 months at this point. Now, at the time, I did an unboxing video and I spoke about specifications, but it is worth pointing out that since then, a new model, a new revision of this card has been released by Gigabyte. The one that I've got has got two 8-pin connectors and a 750 watt power supply is recommended, but a new revision is out, 2.0, as you can see there, and that requires three 8-pin connectors and an 850 watt power supply. So that card will give you a little bit, extra room to do some overclocking, and they have released it at a higher price point as well. It's a couple of £100 more expensive here in the UK. So I published an unboxing video, I showed the installation of the graphics card, but I never did a full review where I looked at performance and showed you the frames per second in different games, mainly because there was a ton of those videos out already. But I have spoke about the Nvidia RTX 3090 series a lot this year because the 3090 and 3080 series are affected by VRAM overheating issues where there's not enough cooling for the VRAM at the back of the graphics card, which leads to the VRAM throttling, especially if you're overclocking, playing certain games, encoding and cryptocurrency mining. There's a lot of different situations where when you're pushing this card and using a lot of memory, the VRAM will overheat. So I did a lot of videos where I showed many different tests where I would use a combination of heat sinks and then fans on top to try and cool that VRAM. And the response I got was fantastic. There was lots of great comments, lots of great suggestions from you guys. In the end, I decided not to open up the card and replace the thermal heat pads, despite the fact it's the best way to reduce the VRAM temperatures, the best way to resolve this issue. But I didn't want to do that simply because I knew that it could void the warranty if they knew that you tampered with it. So I didn't want to do that. I just wanted to reduce the temperatures and just work within the problem that you've got. I still believe that it's a joke that Nvidia has released a series of cards that do have this issue, but there you go. But the response has been fantastic, but there has been a lot of silly comments as well. The last video in particular got a lot of comments about these thermal heat pads, because what I was doing essentially was I was taking all, your suggestions, all your comments, and one of the suggestions was to use thermal heat pads. So I, put these larger heat sinks with these thicker heat pads on the back. I did some tests and I showed you guys the results. And then a day or two later, I went back to these kind of thinner heat pads and these smaller heat sinks and put the fans on top. But despite the fact that I took these larger heat sinks off a day or two later, to this day, I get comments about the fact that thick heat pads don't work as well as thin heat pads. I really should have made it clearer at the time that it was a test and I was doing it because of a user suggestion, but there you go. But this card has been the start of the show all year. This is the card that I've did so many different VRAM tests, overheating tests, and it's performed well. When I was planning my PC build at the end of 2020, my initial hope was that I could pick up the Nvidia 3080 Founders Edition card or one of the smaller third-party 3080 cards. But I'm sure you're aware that over the last 9 or 10 months or so, there has been a GPU shortage. Now, I was fortunate enough to pick up a 3090 Founders Edition later, but in January 2021, with my PC sitting there with no graphics card, this was the first graphics card that I saw available in weeks, and it is the one that I bought very quickly. I didn't have to think too much about it, and it's been a fantastic card. It really has been a fantastic card. Yes, fan noise can be loud if you've got it set at 100%, but if you're video editing, if you're gaming, you don't have to set fans that high. Likewise, the VRAM issue is annoying, but there's only certain situations such as mining or encoding that arises, and you can work around it by undervolting and, like I said, use heat sinks and different things. Performance was great too. Whether I was video editing or playing games, I was always happy. I was pushing over 200 frames per second on Apex and Call of Duty and Warzone and different things. So I was always happy with the card. One downside was the weight. It's a very heavy card, and if you don't want your GPU to start sinking on your motherboard and putting pressure on it, you really should use a GPU brace or a GPU stand. But the big problem with this card was the size. It's something that I really didn't plan for, and it's something I had to kind of change things around with my PC build. It measures 313 centimeters that way. From here to here is 138 centimeters. But the big problem really for me was what they call the height, or the width if you look at it from here. This part here is 70 millimeters, 7 centimeters. And what that means is that in the vast majority of motherboards out there, this card will cover the X8. It will cover the X8 slot. And for me, that meant that it covered the slot that I used for my Elgato capture card. The capture card that I used to record gameplay for games that I was playing and publishing on my other YouTube channel. So I had to remove the capture card. There was no other way about it. If I wanted to use this card, I just couldn't use the X8 slot. And another minor issue is that this card is so big, it doesn't fit into my Razer eGPU as well. Like most graphics cards, this Gigabyte RTX 3090 is marketed towards gamers, and we are seeing more gaming builds utilize SSD cards and network adapters and different things, into the X4 and X8s. But I do think that for most gaming builds and for most gamers, the size of this card and the fact that it covers the X8 is a known issue because you're probably not using it anyway. But for me, it was annoying, it was frustrating, and I just didn't like the fact that I'd lost the functionality of an X8 slot from my motherboard. I didn't like the fact that I couldn't use my Elgato 4K60 Pro. So because of that, I always had it at the back of my head that I would put this into another PC at one point, or perhaps, if necessary, sell the card. And as you can see, the fact that I'm holding it just now, that's what I've done. I've taken this out of my PC today and I put in my Nvidia 3090 Founders Edition card, which just gives me just enough room to put in my Elgato capture card. So I now have the Nvidia 3090 FE and my Elgato capture card in my main PC. So I use an Elgato HD60S Plus to record footage from this main camera and a second Elgato HD60S Plus to record footage from my overhead camera above. But with the Elgato 4K60 Pro now in my system, I can record games at 4K at 60, or if I want, 1440p at 144 Hz. Or I can play games at those higher frame rates and stream at 1080p or 1440p. And it just makes it easier for me to just switch over to my Xbox and play games, record live streams. So I'm really happy that I've got that card back into the system because it's been sitting there doing nothing for months. Now, I've not did extensive tests, but looking at it so far, the Nvidia 3090 that I put in seems quite quiet in comparison to the card that I took out, which is quite good because I never considered this to be loud. So it'll be interesting to see what performance and what thermals and all that are like once I do more extensive testing. I've obviously tested the Nvidia 3090 FE before because I used it in my eGPU and I used it in my older PC, but it'll be interesting to see how it performs in this PC with all those additional fans. After using the Gigabyte RTX 3090 AORUS Master for nearly 7 months at this point, I can say this is a card that I can recommend. It is an expensive card, like all 3090s are. I paid £1,650. The new version is retailing at £2,000, and God knows what other people have paid because of scalpers and, companies charging more than they should this year. But I can recommend it. Performance is good. Thermals aren't too bad despite the VRAM issue, and the fan noise isn't too bad either. The big issue for me, and there will be an issue for other people as well, is the sheer size of this card. You know, I think a lot of people will be attracted to this with the lights, with the, you know, the display that you get there. But the size is an issue, and it's why I am going to try and sell it. I'm hoping to sell it because it can fit into my other PC, but it doesn't fit into my eGPU, which makes it a little bit less flexible than other cards that I've got. And even when I put it into my other PC, it does mean that in that other PC, I don't have that X8 slot that I can use. So because of the sheer size of it and the fact that I will always lose an X8 slot when I use this, I'm leaning towards selling it. If I can't sell it, I'll keep it and I will use it. But it is a good card. There's no denying that it is a good card. Thanks for watching, guys. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and I will speak to you all very soon. Take care.